Have you ever wanted to be a host on an ACA show or be the one calling the shots behind the scenes? Are you in Austin, Texas, or at least Austin adjacent? Well, on Saturday, February 25th, make your way down to the Free Thought Library because we'll be holding open auditions for show hosts and orientations for prospective crew members. For those wanting to be hosts, you'll be able to sit in the studio where our shows are broadcast and we'll put you through your paces to see if you can be one of the new personalities of the ACA. For future crew members, you'll get hands-on experience using the equipment used for broadcast and will help us record the host auditions. If you've ever dreamed of being part of the ACA productions, then this is your chance to show us what you've got. This event is free. For more information and registration, visit tiny.cc/ACA auditions.
Good afternoon, YouTubes, and welcome back to another episode of The Nonprofits, the show where we discuss news and topics of the day from a skeptical humanist perspective. My name is Jason Sherwood, and today I am joined by Dr. Richard Firth. Rich, how you doing?
I am very, 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 very good and cold, but generally good.
Okay. Yeah, a little bit chilly out there. We also got Scott Dickie. How are you doing this afternoon?
Hi, Jason. I'm afraid I'm only very, very good today. So I got a little improvement, a little room for improvement.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can fix that for you a little bit later. And last but not least, we have a special guest host making their very first appearance. We've got Aaron Jensen. How are you doing?
YOLO. I'm doing great. Very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So just really quick, how do we know you?
You don't. Nobody knows me.
Really?
I am a brand new person. Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Well, glad to be your first, and hopefully, we'll get you on more and more often if everybody likes you.
I hope so.
All right. So this show, just to let everybody know, is a product of the Atheist Community of Austin, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the promotion of atheism, critical thinking, secular humanism, and the separation of religion and government. For our segments today, our first one is going to be the National Prayer Breakfast is under new management. For our second segment, a new moral panic effective in manipulating the right wing. Then we're going to be talking about dismantling public schools in Florida's central policy. And we've got a strange but true where Kemetic fellatio was their religion, talking specifically about ancient Egypt. So normally you'd see that on SecX, but we're giving it to you for free today. As with all of our shows, links for today's topics and the news that we discuss are available in the description down below. And as a reminder, if you want to come into the show prepared, the best possible show description you can find is on our fan-run Facebook group, and you can find that at tiny.cc/FBNP. All right, so let us go on to our first segment, and newbie Aaron, why don't you go ahead and lead us off?
Great, thank you. So our first story is from the National Catholic Reporter, titled "National Prayer Breakfast Breaks from the Family with New Organization," and it's written by Jack Jenkins. So this story, way back in the early 20th century, there was a Methodist preacher by the name of Abraham who started the trend of prayer breakfast, bringing together business leaders and religious leaders to pray and discuss political things. And that movement grew and grew until the 1940s, where it was established, where Congress started to hold their own. And President Eisenhower was the first president to attend. And ever since then, presidents have attended and given speeches. The last 10 or 15 years, this prayer breakfast has kind of come under a little bit of controversy. It's run by a very secretive organization that people call the Family, but it's formerly known as the International Foundation. And there was a book written about it, and there's a Netflix series on it. And then in 2018, a controversy erupted because a Russian, I believe, a woman was trying to exploit the breakfast as part of a conspiracy to act as an agent for the Russian Federation. And so this year they have broken from the larger prayer breakfast and actually started a smaller prayer breakfast. The old breakfast was more like a conference. It was held over 2 days, and there were lots of international people. I think a third of the attendees were international attendees, and they'd all come together. And the highlight was the president's speech. Well, now they're paring it down so that just members of Congress can come. About 300 members of Congress will be there. They're each allowed a guest, whether a spouse or their preacher or member of their religious organization. And then the president will speak, and that will be it. And the traditional, the old prayer breakfast will still be happening. It's called The Gathering, and they will be simulcasting the president's speech into that event as well. So that's what's going on with the prayer breakfast.
So this is kind of a disturbing. When I was going through this whole article, a lot of things felt very kind of James Bond, Spectre kind of really weird stuff going on. But I want to, why are we having this? And especially, why is it now being moved to the Capitol building? You know, didn't we have this whole little separation of church and state? Why is it being held on such a public grounds? Scott, do you have any answers for us on that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I can't believe I'm the third person to speak on this, and no one has made a Highlander joke yet. They're calling it The Gathering, right? So I'm picturing a warehouse with all the members of Congress packed in there. They all have swords, and the last one standing gets the prize. But sadly, that's not going to be what's happening. That would be C-SPAN's greatest ratings ever. But
I would definitely watch that.
for sure. But I think what we're seeing here, I mean, obviously it's just pandering. It's pandering to the religious voters, right? There's lots of religious voters in this country, and so it's just religious creep. And so it's these days it's becoming more and more acceptable to be an atheist or to even be somebody who's religious but keeps it separate from their job, which would be what a secular government is. We can have members of the government being religious, but they need that support. They need that cash. They need those voter blocks to be pitching in and getting them reelected. So, it seems clear to me that is why we have the prayer breakfast, because it's a question of getting voters.
Now, when you say religious creep, I'm wondering if you're saying like the religious expansion or just religious creeps, because of how this shadowy organization is looking like.
I'm talking about religion seeping in, and every time you look back, it's grown another foot, and it's kind of reaching in and kind of sneaking in and taking over things without us realizing, because it's so slow.
Gotcha. So, Rich, when we're talking about this prayer breakfast, we know that Britain is, the people are secular, but your government tends to not be. What are your takes on this prayer breakfast and kind of the religious creep that Scott was talking about?
It is interesting. One thing that people keep bringing up about the UK is we have this blatant, our head of state is the head of the state religion as well. But at the same time, our head of state has virtually no power at all. They're a figurehead, essentially. And somehow that, and having bishops in our House of Lords, which also has an amount of power, but if it oversteps it, the Commons say, no, seems to stop this kind of very religious lobbying happening. It's almost as if we have this attitude of, well, you've got the bishops, you've got the king, now get stuffed. You've got enough. So we kind of balance it out. It's weird. But What I found interesting about the creep in America is when you mention Eisenhower and the period in history. Of course, this isn't just the period in history where a president turned up at a prayer breakfast. It's also the period in American history where God started popping up on money and the Pledge of Allegiance and the motto and all sorts of other stuff. So it's been a long creep. It's been a long sort of, let's see if we can twist religion into American politics, make the founding fathers spin in their graves and weep a little bit, which I think they're doing a lot of at the moment, to be honest. I'm surprised you don't use them to power the entire country, the speed they're spinning right now. But yeah, I think it's got a long history and it's got a strange, it's clearly about voters, it's clearly about money, and this whole thing of, it says in the article that people can, that the congressmen that can go to this breakfast can bring either one person with them that can be either a significant other or their local pastor. And you sort of, well, that's blatant, isn't it? How blatant is it? And I kind of think to myself, what if you wanted to bring a humanist celebrant instead, or an imam? How would that play in this particular prayer breakfast? Because yeah, I find it's a long time coming, and it's something to watch because this creep is I think it's more embedded than you'd like it to be. And this is that whole bring your priest is just like, yeah, we're going to stop pretending. This is the state and religion are intertwined. What you do about it, I don't know. It's over to you. We've done it by sticking the bishops in some seats and saying, sit there and shut up, but you've got to find your own way.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have a little penalty box to put our religion in. But Scott, you wanted to make a point.
Yeah. So, so what about this bothers us? And that is that, well, we're supposed to be a secular government. We're supposed to have separation of church and state. There's supposed to be a wall of separation there. And, we used to have, I suppose, this thing called the Lemon Test, right? This was a product of the early 70s from the Supreme Court. It got its name from the case Lemon v. Kurtzman, which was in 1971. Basically, it outlines some guidelines that the court can use to determine whether or not laws or activities are allowed. If there's any kind of special religious entanglement. And they had a 3-pronged test. One was, does the law or activity have a clear secular purpose? I think we clearly fail that prong and for this prayer breakfast. 2, does the law or activity primarily advance or inhibit religion? They might argue by saying it's non-denominational or it's multi-faith or whatever, but I don't. Is there an atheist, contingent being invited there too? 3, does the law or activity create an excessive government entanglement with religion? And that's the slippery one, right? And but basically what's happening here is it's a big lobby festival. It's a lobby fest right there. And so that clearly, I think, smashes that 3rd prong. And so we're left prongless here, right? Unfortunately, in recent years, the court has kind of reversed course on the usefulness or the applicability of the Lemon Law. And so nowadays they say, so this was Kennedy v. Bremerton School District. The court basically chucked the Lemon Test entirely and stated that the Establishment Clause, quote, must be interpreted by reference to historical practices and understandings. And so that, kind of takes the entire purpose of the Lemon Law or of the Establishment Clause, instead just throws it out the window. So religious lobbying is okay now because religious lobbying has always been okay, right? Just like their reversal on Roe v. Wade, we can see that there's more of that religious creep, right? They're starting to undo what have been pillars in our American Constitution and our American laws. And so it's tough. It's tough to accept. It's tough to sit back and watch. Well, obviously, we're not just sitting back and watching. There are things that we can do. Voting, for one thing, making our voices known, spreading information like we're doing on this show. We have to combat these efforts by the courts and by religious organizations to change our Constitution. We want to keep there are these certain foundational principles that we want to keep intact, Otherwise, we're not going to be the same country. It's I don't know, it's like trying to save somebody who's drowning, right? As they drown, they can be some of the most dangerous people if they're feeling that they're dying, because they'll start flailing and thrashing, and I'm wondering if that's what we're seeing here as religion, as American culture and American society, well, worldwide culture and worldwide society matures and develops and decides we can set aside the superstition. Those who are still superstitious are going to grab onto every little bit that they can, even if it means changing the rules. I just hope that we can survive these death throes of religion, if that's what we're seeing, which we've, very well might not be, but but we can dream and we can hope, I think.
I mean, yeah, we have seen a lot of movement toward the secularism in the 80s and 90s to some extent, a little bit in the 2000s. And then there's just been this massive pushback in the past about 10 years or so, where we're like, oh, no. You need to definitely get God and prayer and all that back into government and religion. And I just, when you look at the trampling that the Establishment Clause has been getting, it's absolutely disturbing. But Aaron, do you see any positives? I mean, I know this is a hard thing to go with this particular article, but do you see any positives of the pushback and seeing, hey, it's gotten smaller, right? This organization has been under attack. They've been under the microscope. It's gotten smaller. The gathering's gotten smaller. So that's good, right?
Sure, maybe a little bit better. Every time I heard about the prayer breakfast, I always assumed it was just a small gathering where the president came, they prayed, and he gave a speech. I thought that's what it was. It wasn't until I read this article that I realized, oh no, this is like a 2-day conference, and there's 1,000+ people that come in and rub shoulders with congressmen and other representatives of our government. And these are religious leaders from our country and from other countries that just get to come in and lobby and talk to our representatives and build relationships, and all under the guise of a prayer breakfast of religion. And so I'm glad it's smaller and we are reducing that influence, that potential foreign influence and influence of other people. But I'd much prefer to see it kind of go away and maybe have a national secular breakfast where we get together and we take our values and we decide, but we chuck religion for a few minutes and we decide what's best for our country. Maybe have a moment of silence instead of prayer, so that everybody can do what they want to do in that moment. If some people want to pray, they can. If some people don't, just take a moment of silence. But I just as soon chuck the whole thing, to be honest. I'm not sure what purpose it serves in our government.
Secular second breakfast, 11sies, then there's tea time. Oh, never mind.
That's 2 movie references now in one story.
Yeah, who's counting? Obviously Scott is. But yeah, it really is interesting that we see this dating back to the 40s and 50s, that we are taking some of the things that were terrible about regimes that we fought against, and it's like, yes, those regimes were terrible, but they knew how to organize their people. And it's like, that's kind of the point, though. I feel that we are losing some of our freedoms. Like a lot of religious people, a lot of conservatives would say, hey, we want our religious freedoms. And it's like, okay, great, you can have that, but don't push your religious freedoms onto us. Let us have our freedoms as well. And that's the major pushback that I feel a lot of us have. Don't push your stuff on us, and we won't push our stuff on you. But because they do, that's why we have shows like this and all the other shows on the ACA. But I think we need to start getting to the next segment, but Aaron, let's get some words from you.
Well, yeah, the main purpose of this gathering was political. The people were coming together and they're trying to get policies, and it's something that I kind of understand, but I don't understand. You would think that more people that are religious would be behind a separation of religion and government, because everything's great today if your religion's in charge. But what if someday your religion's not in charge, and then you've got another religion that's coming up, and they pass laws that you don't like? The only thing that gives us peace is to have that separation, so that no one religion's in control.
So you're saying we should just get rid of it?
Keep
Rich,
out of
what
my
have you got?
Not much really. I think we've said it all, and it's quite clear what the problem is. The problem is that religion is trying to get its way into government, and there are certain parts of your America's government structure that would really love to be some kind of pseudo theocracy if they could get away with it, put God into everything. I don't have any answers for that apart from shows like this and push back and say no as often as you can. And that wonderful thing, the voting booth.
Excellent. And Scott, I know you have something that you want to add.
Yeah, just one little thing as we wrap this one up. I, for one, am not comfortable that this is smaller, because I think it's just smaller in profile. I think it's still just as strong, just as much there. I think we just can't see it as much, and I think that's entirely intentional.
So would you say that just like the nationalist voices that went back into the woodwork, after the 40s and 50s, and that were given a mouthpiece in the last 10 years, you think that something similar could happen with this?
Yeah, I think they're not reinforcing the separation of church and state. They're just saying, let's just not talk about it as much. Let's just not have it on the news as much. They're making it less obvious, and so large portion of the population won't realize what's going on. They'll say, oh, they're making it smaller. Oh, that's awesome. I
Or
disagree.
also that's terrible too. Yeah, this is, like I said, everything about this doesn't really pass the smell test in any way, shape, or form. It's when you have one of them saying, oh, this is a completely and different and totally separate from the family, and basically adding in a "trust me, bro" citation needed on that. No. And while they haven't had this breakfast yet, I certainly am about to lose my lunch. So before we go on to the next segment, I do want to thank all of our veteran and new viewers for giving us over 11,000 subscribers. We are so close to 12. 12 doesn't really get us much anything other than, hey, we're now at 12. But it would really be great if we can just keep pushing forward on that. So if you're watching us now and you haven't subscribed, you really need to get on that. You need to smash that like button because it really helps us in the algorithm. Ring the bell so that you always know when a new episode premieres. And that's not just the main episode here, which happens every Sunday at 3 p.m. Central, but also when we clip out the segments, when we do new shorts. We're constantly putting out more and more content. And so ringing that bell just lets you know when it happens. And then, go ahead and share this link to your friends, your family members, coworkers, people who are, of a belief, people who are not of a belief, just so that they can see, hey, this is how we bring you the news. And it really, really helps out the channel. Also, the Atheist Community of Austin does have another YouTube channel that is podcast only. So check out the Atheist Experience Network, where you can find all the ACA shows in podcast form. Subscribe at tiny.cc/AEN podcast to listen to, your favorite flagship of the ACA nonprofits, the Atheist Experience, the Tugboat Secular Sexuality, and also other shows that we haven't produced in a while, but are still really, really great content. So for our next segment, we are going to go over the new moral panic of grooming. And Rich, I think you're going to be leading us off on this.
I am. Well, history is replete, that's one of my favorite words, replete, with examples of people using a moral disquietment, something people don't like within their societies, to find a group of people and demonize them. It's how the witch crazes happened. It's how the Nazis gained power and got away with what they did. These things happen time and time again. According to Matthew Rosza of the Salon, it's happening right now in the good state of Florida. It would be Florida, wouldn't it? With Governor Ron DeSantis is banning his books in public schools, and the excuse is he doesn't want people to groom children and pedophiles. And the people he doesn't want grooming are, of course, the LGBT. Too many letters for me, that, plus community. Because obviously not. And this is the latest example. It's an interesting article of the latest example of how it seems to be a go-to of right-wing parties, not just in the US, but beyond. And they're doing it again. And it's, it is back. It is back, and it is in Florida. So the reason you can't get certain books is because LGBTQ plus people are groomers. What say you people?
Yeah, we've covered this in multiple episodes. We've talked about the banning of books. We've talked about librarians being under attack, where they're even getting death threats. Definitely go through our back catalog, because this battle is not even close to being over. And I don't even think we're in the middle of it. This is really just kind of the tip of the iceberg. But we hear, okay, they're calling us groomers. And when you hear the word groomers, I kind of want to, what does everybody here think? And without kind of straw manning, what do you think other people are hearing when they hear about the word groomers? Aaron, what are you thinking?
Well, I think it makes people conjure up images of being under attack, especially their children. I had my communications professor in college said, if you can get kids involved in your argument, you've almost always won. Because putting kids in danger is really going to get people's fear response going, and they're going to conjure up these scary images of people teaching their children things that they don't want to be taught. The problem is you can't really groom people. People are what they are. They're born the way they are, and you can't really. There's no such thing as groomers. There are risk factors that make people more susceptible to sexual abuse. From the CDC websites, I saw the 2 risk factors that they listen are being under the age of 4 and having special needs that may increase caregiver burdens. That's it. That's what increases the likelihood that someone's going to be a victim of sexual abuse, not what someone's sexuality or gender is.
I mean, so are we saying that, we just don't care about kids, that we don't, because we're allowing the LGBT to kind of be what they are. We are supportive of drag shows. Does that mean that we are okay with harm?
No, absolutely not. We're not okay with harm. What we want to do is, instead of focusing on this scary thing over here, let's focus on solving the real problem. The real problem is we don't want kids to be sexually abused, right? And reading books doesn't cause people to be sexually abused. Reading books doesn't cause someone to become homosexual or LGBTQIA or any of that. People are born the way they're born. Books don't contribute to that. Books have ideas, which can be very scary to some people. This whole, and so, yeah, there are so many better things that we can do to keep our kids safe. From that same CDC website, they say that Preventative factors that help us prevent sexual abuse include having employed, educated, and nurturing caregivers, and having good communities that provide safe, stable housing, high quality preschool, nurturing and safe childcare, safe, engaging school programs and activities, medical care and mental health services, economic and financial help, work opportunities, and family-friendly policies. Instead of banning books, let's start making policies that improve people's parenting skills, parenting abilities, and economic conditions.
And we'll make sure to link that CDC article in our notes as well. So, why is this message so effective? So, I get that we're trying to say, hey, we want to protect kids, or they want to protect kids. But why is the sensationalism so effective? Scott or Rich, who wants to answer that?
I can step in here. One thing I think we need to point out here, though, is that the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, is running for president. Basically, he's gearing up for a run for president, and so he's trying to. So obviously, a lot of what he's doing here is pandering to the bigotry bloc. Oh, hey there, bigotry duck. To the bigot bloc, which is a large part of his support base, and so this demonization it's a tactic. It's a tactic. They frame it as if it were a moral or a safety issue. I don't see them warning about people going to confession at a Catholic church. I mean, I don't know.
Or expecting a two-party or two-peer system when a priest is with an altar boy, which
right.
It's sad that we need to even say that, but there have been so many cases out there. It is something. Don't try to put out our house while yours is still burning, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, I think what that illustrates, though, is that this is not obviously they're cheering and warning and yelling about the kids' safety, but not our people, right? But not our people. It's only the people with the D's by their name who are going to be grooming our kids. But it's a natural tactic to use. It's a very effective. People are very defensive about their kids, and well, it's evolution. I mean, it's evolutionarily supported. I mean, the parents who did not overreact and hyper protect their kids, the people who didn't do that, their kids would be less likely to survive and to carry on their DNA. And so, it's first of all, it's clear that that's why they're using it, and second of all, it's clear that that's ineffective. So I don't see why we shouldn't be surprised that this is happening at all. It's just it's human nature, and it's one party taking advantage of human nature.
I wonder if some people think that we might necessarily be doing something similar, that we are saying, hey, look, it's terrible that they're forcing a religious idea when it's just parents teaching their kids their culture, their history, their belief structure. Now, it would be nice if they were able to do that within the guise of, but you can go ahead and make your own decision. But I kind of wonder if some of this pushback could potentially be us saying, hey, no, we need to put this out there. We need to, if they only just were quiet about their homosexuality or their other natures and all that. I wonder if they try to say a little bit the same about us. But Rich, what do you think?
I think that's an interesting point that they all raised that, but it's kind of an odd one in that. To use the UK as an example, in 1988 we had something that was called Section 28. Section 28 of the Local Government Act, and that Section 28 basically made it illegal for local authorities to, quote, promote homosexuality. The problem was nobody knew what on earth that meant. I mean, what was promoting homosexuality exactly? Was it putting big posters up saying "be gay"? I don't know. What he's supposed to do with this sort of thing. It took 12 years for that to be got rid of in our country, and it was fought every single day. I was there fighting it. I almost fell off a bridge once, but that's another story. But it was a moment where it was a similar thing. It was a quite right-wing conservative government who wanted to find a group and put a law in that would make a certain section of their voters definitely vote for them, using a very, very old tactic, as I mentioned at the beginning during the intro, which is to create othering, which is to say they are them and we are us, and they are transgressors, so we do not want to be like them. So those people, they do these terrible things. Honest, they do these awful things. And the oldest known way of developing a group to demonize, and once you've got a group to demonize, you can vote against them. As you're saying, there's this kind of, I think, within the minds of a lot of people in certain political persuasions, the left are where the gays are. And that's the LGBTQ plus area on the left, which of course isn't true. One of the most controversial Republicans in the House right now is gay. So, it's, what are they talking about? But that's kind of a picture that's being painted. And they're using an old tactic. It worked for Margaret Thatcher. It worked for the Nazi Party. It worked for Urban II when he wanted to start the Crusades, not against the LGBTQ plus, of course, but against those terrible marauding Muslims. It was, it's a response to kind of couples of moral disgust. They are a contagion that need to be cleaned. I could go on to this forever because this is my topic, so I'll not. But it's this kind of idea of othering. I'll narrow it down to that. It's othering, and it's very powerful, and that's why they're doing it. And it's not necessarily because they believe it. I mean, it's not just, by the way, books that mention in any way that people aren't all heterosexual. Shocker for the world, hey? It's also books that talk about Frederick Douglass and Rosa Parks and things like that. We're like, what are you talking about? This is history. Why can't we have history books about history? Something dear to my heart. But he's banning them. All I know is when people start banning books, worry. That's kind of mine. And when it comes to saying to us, are we doing a similar thing? Are we just saying, no, you shouldn't be allowed to teach your culture? We're not. We're saying teach your culture all you like. Just don't impose it. Just don't force it on me. And I think he's trying to argue that these cultures are being forced on kids when they're not. They're just being, here's some information, take it or leave it. Anyway, I could ramble on about othering and how this process works for 5 hours, and I think we've got a deadline, have we not? So
a little bit of one.
Yeah.
I mean, we could always cross into the atheist experience because who needs that? But you should just be watching the nonprofits all the time.
They don't need the subscribers.
Yeah.
2 words: flagship.
Flagship. Absolutely. Don't ever anybody forget about that. I see this a little bit like one of the old schoolyard arguments I heard back in the 90s and all that, and this might get a little bit offensive where, one person goes, are you gay? And then they ask, do your parents know you're gay? Kind of trying to trip you up in a little bit of that. And it's like, are you a pedophile groomer? Do your kids know you are? And it's just, it's so disturbing, so disingenuous, so ignoring of any type of fact or figure about what homosexual people are, anybody within the LGBTQ community, anybody who has been to a drag show, who wants to do reading. We've talked about this, ad nauseum. But Aaron, what are you thinking on this?
I really like Dr. Rich's point about othering. That's something that I feel strongly about too, because there really is no other. We're all part of the human race. I don't want to sound naive or, lovey-dovey, but we're all born. We all live our lives and we all die. And I think we all want the same things. We all want to be loved and taken care of, right? And we want to be seen as human beings. And the fact that there are groups that are being demonized is really sad because they're human beings. They have their experiences too. And the fact that that these politicians can dig into this fear response that we have is Well, I don't like it. And the reason they can do that is because we have this bias. We have the tendency in our brains to be scared of something we can vividly imagine, right? And we can vividly imagine lots of things. We can vividly imagine terrorist attacks. Hence the success of locking down and getting rid of our privacy in the early aughts after 9/11. It was really easy for people to imagine terrorist attacks, and so it was really easy to get funding and stuff for anti-terrorism measures. And so, guess what? The most dangerous thing everybody does every day: driving your car. Driving your car is the most dangerous thing you do every day, but nobody thinks about it because it's just so normal and commonplace. But you put kids in danger, and suddenly people come up with all sorts of really scary things in their head. Just because it's scary in your head doesn't mean it's scary in real life.
Yeah, we have definitely seen where, especially on the driving, there was so much pushback when booster seats really became prevalent. It's like, well, I'm not going to put my kid in a booster seat. Why would I need to put my kid in a booster seat? And this because, well, the technology of having seatbelts and airbags needs to kind of put that kid where things are going to be we're going to be safer. Oh, I don't believe that. That's just rubbish. And you really can't get past that. It's one of the reasons why straw man arguments are so convincing to people, because they're able to convince themselves that, oh, you're not human. Okay, let's take a little bit of break though, because I think we need it. These two segments were pretty heavy, and also, if you didn't tune into the other ACA shows last week, here is what you missed.
Lubrication. Yeah. We preach this a lot here. It's great. Use it.
Lube is your friend!
How can I reason when an atheist believes they share a grandpa with a chimpanzee?
I don't believe that.
Nobody believes that.
The Pope's saying that homosexuality is not a crime. And I suppose we can call this a step in the right direction. I don't know if I should actually start singing Step in the Right Direction.
You threw me off by jumping into hard solipsism, because that's not somewhere I was going to go into.
I'm constantly unconvinced about your existence, Richard. I don't know why. I'm sorry.
Johnny, when you commit sin, don't you feel kind of bad? And kind of...
I don't think I've ever committed a sin in my many years walking this earth.
Have you ever looked at a woman with lust?
Oh, yeah.
And we are back. So, if you can arrange to be in the Austin area between Thursday, February 23rd and Sunday, February 26th, consider joining us in the studio audience for the ACA Free Thought Library for live broadcasts of secular sexuality, Truth Wanted, Talk Heathen, and the Atheist Experience. Doors open at 6 p.m. on Thursday and Friday, and on noon on Sunday. Parking is wherever you can find a legal spot after the lot is full. Just go around the corner. If you can't make it this month, we will continue to broadcast live from the library the last week of each month. So keep watching this show and our website, atheist-community.org, for news and information as we expand our studio offerings in the near future. And for our third segment, we are once again going back to Florida. And Scott, I think you wanted to lead us off.
I don't know if that I love talking about Florida. I just love talking about Florida. But yeah, so this is an article titled Once-Subversive Plot to Dismantle Traditional Public Schools in Florida, Now Central Policy. And it's by Frank Cerabino. And our particular article was from the palmbeachpost.com. So yeah, Florida's pushing school vouchers again. This is hot on the heels of a Supreme Court decision last summer that tore down part of that solid wall of church state separation And they said that if state funds could be used as vouchers for private schools, then they must also include religious schools. So there's more of that religious creep that we've been talking about. This is a subject. Oh, by the way, if you're not familiar with what school vouchers are, it's when the state can take some of the funding that was earmarked for public school, and then they can funnel it towards, if a student wanted to go to a private school, then their money would go with them, kind of a thing. Full disclosure here, I've been a teacher for 25 plus years. I've worked in public schools. I work in a public college now. This hits very close to home for me, and I'll apologize now if I get angry during this, but I think before I dive in here, earlier Jason was telling me that I'm not talking enough. I need to talk longer. And so before I get into that, was that not exactly what
I said? No, that wasn't quite what I said.
That's what I heard. But I think before I dive into all of what I have to say about vouchers, I'll give my fellow panelists a chance to chime in on this.
So for this episode, I actually wanted to do something a little bit different. I don't know if it has been noticed. I wanted to kind of have a little bit more question and answer session and try to create a little bit more of a dialogue. And of course, the first question that I posted, which is more of a rhetorical question, is, Florida, are you okay? It's not for us. It's just kind of one of those questions I want to throw out there. But let's think about this. So would a short-term solution be to just get rid of all vouchers? If these vouchers are taking good money out of public schools, is the answer to just get rid of them? And how would that affect kids who could benefit from going to a private institution, not necessarily a religious one? There are some secular private institutions out there, but how would taking that money out of the school voucher program wholesale affect kids who could potentially benefit from it?
Well, I'm going to give a British view here because our schooling is very different. We have religious schools. We have many, many, many religious schools. We have far too many religious schools, and I'm part of a campaign to get rid of said religious schools. However, what we also have is a very tight, very strongly controlled national curriculum. And if said religious school, and this has happened, are discovered to be teaching, say, creationism as science, they get penalized. If they are lucky, their head of the school will be fired. If they're unlucky, the school will be fired. They will say, nope, this school can't run anymore because you are not teaching the curriculum at all. You have to. So I have a similar system. Also, our students can choose which school they like to go to. Now, the negative of that is you end up with schools that fail because nobody wants to put their kids in there. And so they don't get the funding, so they don't get particularly experienced teachers. And so they create this cycle of not being a very good school. And other schools are amazing. These more money than you can believe. They get sponsorships. They've got all what you wouldn't believe. So it doesn't work, basically, the way it should. And I fear that that's what the vouchers are going to do to Florida. But again, who's doing this in Florida? Is it the guy who wants to be your next president? And why is he doing it in Florida? Well, yeah. I'll leave that to you, really.
Yeah, and we will have to be very careful if an announcement of that happens, because then we won't be able to talk about certain things on that aspect. But that's neither here nor there. Aaron, I think you wanted to answer that question as well.
Yeah, I found a study that someone had done. It seemed to be pretty independent and not really funded by anybody that had an agenda. And they basically said that school vouchers actually increase the cost of education by 11 to 33%. And I'm assuming we'll leave that in the show notes so people can see what their reasoning is. There's a very, very big paper on it. But my issue with school vouchers is that while in theory, yes, it sounds like you're democratizing education and giving people choice, but in practice, you're not, because there's more to getting to go to a private school than just being accepted. You know, there's all sorts of costs around going to school that aren't being covered by the vouchers that a lot of people can't afford. And no matter, even if you give them a voucher, they can't go to that private school. They're stuck going to their school. And so I want to see us investing more in our education. A good democracy needs well-educated, equally educated people.
I definitely agree with that. And on that note, though, we've actually talked about how, because we've talked about school vouchers in the past, we've talked about homeschooling to a certain extent, and for some kids in the United States and possibly around the world, but this is obviously a United States centric article here, but some kids in the United States still are not in an area where they have easy access or even any access to public education. Even if a remote type of learning was involved, they may not have the fast internet to do kind of FaceTime or Zoom time learning. So do we just say, hey, even though there's this private institution, and unfortunately it may be religious because that's how small the town is, do we say, oh, you're going to get no funds, you're going to get no other education, and too bad, so sad? How do we not leave that, again, small portion of the population to the wayside? Should we still have a kind of like a happy medium? Scott, what do you think?
I think that you highlight one of the problems with using school vouchers, and that is private schools are not obligated to adhere to any kind of regulation or strictures or anything imposed by the government. It's law that students be provided a free, accessible education, and private schools don't need to do that. Don't need to comply, because they're private. They're private institutions. They're not public organizations. They're even though they're accepting government money, there's very few strings attached to that money. And so really what's happening here is it's just, and that's a for the people that are in favor of school vouchers, that's a feature, not a bug. And so they're saying we can get more money to these organizations that will not necessarily teach evolution in schools, that will not accept the Black children from down the street, or the handicapped student from the other side of the city, or whatever. I mean, it's a fundamental failing of that particular aspect of American culture. We pride ourselves in educating our youth and being one of the leaders in technology in the world, one of the the leaders, and depending on who you ask, we're leaders in pretty much everything, right? I mean, that's ego is certainly something that there's no shortage of in the United States here. But if we're going to pride ourselves on being leaders, if we want to play that role, if we want to do that, we need to have a strong foundation. And I mean, this just cuts right to the core of that and undermines it from the get-go.
It's funny that you mentioned something like that, because that reminds me of the first 2 minutes of the HBO TV show, The Newsroom, where the question is, how is America the greatest country on the world? And Jeff Daniels' character says it isn't, and then goes into a massive tirade as to why not. And yeah, that kind of reminds me, we could do better, and we should do better, because if we're going to be kind of this leadership, we should have the best educated base, I would think. But we don't. we just demonstrably do not. And we've also seen where public funds have gone squandered in public schools, where our schools really are in disarray and are decaying horribly. Aaron, what do you think about that?
I think it's terrible. I think that education is cheap compared to the results of not having an education. I'm constantly flabbergasted at why schools don't get the funding they need, why teachers don't make more money, why we don't have the best education in the world. We don't. You can go out there and easily find where we do not have the best grade school, middle school, high school educations in the world. We're behind. We're underfunded. We don't have enough teachers. There's just so many problems. And I get really mad when people, it seems like vouchers are a way for people to, instead of turning around and fixing those problems, escaping them and going off and going somewhere where they don't have to face those problems. So I'd like us to come together, listen to the experts on education, and figure out how we can make it better and give them more money.
But we have seen private institutions that have been able to do better, that do have some better programs. And I'm not saying that private institutions are perfect. We have already highlighted a bunch here, and there's so many more. But
if you're going to teach to the standards, if you're going to teach what's appropriate rather than your own stuff, private, I don't care. You can have school money. That's fine by me. But if you're going to be receiving money from the government for education, you have to be teaching to a standard. You have to be held accountable to that same standard as the other schools do.
And I would say that the infrastructure should also be to a particular standard. So if you are in a cold climate, you should be able to have heat. If you're in a very hot climate, you should have air conditioning to make the learning experience palatable, so that people aren't just constantly worrying about their health while they're also trying to learn. So Rich, how screwed up is our just hearing from this, how screwed up do you feel our education system is, and compared to yours?
Well, ours is a weird one. I tend to teach when I teach at university, first year undergrads, and it's strange because people have been getting simultaneously better and worse at the subject. Somehow the Gen Zers are brighter but less knowledgeable, if that makes any sense. Just as a group, they seem to be more, and I think the knowledgeable thing is because it's a totally different thing, but our government's obsessed with end of year exams. Everything's got to be an end of year exam, and so you've got to memorize dates, and for history, which is what I teach, you've got to memorize dates and places and names and all this kind of stuff. And as I wrote to our health secretary once, memorizing dates and places and names is no more history than memorizing a hardware catalog is building a house. So it's like, it's this weird thing that's happening. And that's partly due to, we've got this structure here where there's a lot of semi-private schools that call themselves academies. They're public schools with private funding, so they've got glistening new buildings and beautiful everything to begin with. But a lot of them are failing. And the reason a lot of them are failing is because they've basically marketized the school system. And so whenever you create a market for a school system, some schools are better at advertising, because all of a sudden schools have to advertise, for crying out loud. Some schools are better at advertising than others. And I think reading the article, there are even the private schools failing, popping up and disappearing, and popping up and disappearing, because you need a big, powerful chunk of wedge of cash to be able to market your school to everybody locally and get your kids there if you're using a system like a voucher system. And that is one of the issues we've had. I mean, they said that the academies were a great success. Of course they did, but they aren't. And another aspect that I've mentioned before is that these private schools are allowed to teach what they want. And I think that is very important, because they shouldn't be. Eton, you've heard of Eton, right? Something like 90% of our prime ministers went to Eton. The current one didn't. He went to the second best one down the road. But we'll go into why another time. I'm sure you can guess. But most of our prime ministers went to Eton. Very posh, very expensive private school. Costs millions to send your kid to Eton. They still follow the national curriculum. They still teach the same maths, the same English, the same science, the same language courses. They just have enough money to make it one-on-one tuition and things like that, which is every parent's dream, to have a qualified teacher one-to-one with their child for an hour every week. but they have a curriculum. And that's what I find amazing here, is that you have these, take your vouchers, go to a school that can, if they want, can teach you that up is down, left is right, black is white, get killed on the next zebra crossing kind of signs. It's just bizarre to me that I don't understand why that would be allowed. But at the same time, I do, because of course you've got this powerful religious lobby who want to teach humans walked with dinosaurs and all that kind of crap. But it shouldn't be that way. That's how you answer it. You have a tough curriculum and then go, whatever.
I 100% agree there. And one thing I want to highlight that was mentioned in this article is that the organization who is really pushing this through is called the Education Freedom Institute. And one of the things that they have said very publicly is that they want to start a cultural war about this idea of education freedom. And we've seen time and time again, bills and ideas and all that kind of, using an antonym to what they're actually trying to do. And so I want to ask this is one last question of the entire panel here, and I'm going to start with Scott on that. But, can a institution that calls itself the Education Freedom Institute really call themselves that? And are they right for starting a cultural war and still saying, oh, it's about education freedom? Scott.
Educational freedom as a phrase is a sketchy phrase. The idea of education is to have a common understanding. And so in some ways, the idea of freedom, as Rich was saying, we need to regulate, there has to be some kind of common core of the curriculum there. And so so that in itself is counter to freedom. I also think I have a problem with the word education in that title too, because clearly what they're doing is not promoting good education. Aaron mentioned that it's actually more expensive to do it that way. I haven't read the research that Aaron was citing there, but I would suspect that they're talking about the overall cost of education on a per pupil basis. Public schools actually are a little bit more expensive because students there are provided with special education support, which private schools are not required to give all the time. Other types of disabilities need to be supported. Things like speech therapy, occupational therapy. Many students, when I worked at a public high school in Minneapolis, we had a clinic in the school. We were the primary source of healthcare for many of our students. And so that's a failing. Obviously, if we had a better healthcare system, that wouldn't be an issue, but still that's part of the school system. That's part of what we need to provide. Jason, you mentioned that there are stories where private schools are doing better. They have these programs that do better. I would think that those would be anecdotal. Statistical studies have shown that overall, private schools don't do as good of a job as a solid public school. And so I could go on this for many, many more minutes, but I will stop here.
All right, Rich.
Yeah, I mean, just it's an interesting fact of schools that if you want a good educated population, it's actually not that complicated. What you do is you fund schools, public schools, really well. You pay teachers properly to attract more talented people into the profession, and then the rest takes care of itself. You've got good teachers and good schools. For a brief moment in the UK at the end of the 90s, the early noughties, Tony Blair, who famously ran on education, did that. And the number of people going to university in this country went from 15% to 40% in about 5 years. That's what it can do. I mean, that's incredible. It's one of the great successes he had that people seem to forget about because he was a bit of an idiot about a war, but we won't go into that. But it's all it is. And I don't know, instead of messing about with vouchers and playing politics and trying to crowbar your religion, you just fund the schools and pay the teachers. That's all you need to do.
All right.
Yeah. How many good teachers have we lost out on because we don't pay them? Maybe, how many people want to be teachers, but they look at what teachers get paid and said, I can't live on that. And so they move off and do something else.
Yeah, it is very concerning how our education. I personally, I feel like our education system needs a revamp from the ground up. I have my own personal ideas on that one, and that also could probably take many, many minutes, which we really just don't have time for. So instead, let's talk about how you can support the ACA. And one of the ways you can do that is you can become a member of this channel for as little as 99 cents a month. Click on the join button down below this video. This will give you access to special chat emojis and a little secret about chat emojis, because we don't have a whole lot currently, but that is tied to how many members we have. More members mean more chat emojis. So, hey, help us get some more emojis so that you can express yourself in chat during the live broadcast or even later on. Also, we have a brand new store. And I love mentioning this because I got to mention the revamp of it, and I get to see all the new shirts, and this one looks absolutely amazing. But, visit tinycc/merch ACA to get all your favorite items like t-shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, and Richard Gilliver, I keep on forgetting to show that dang tote bag. I mean, it is right there in the image. It's right next to the coffee mug. It's just a little canvas bag, but we call it a tote bag. It's not that big a deal. Not a big deal. Anyways, so yeah, check out beanies, phone cases, and the special ACA t-shirt, which we mentioned is limited item each month, if I could actually speak. So be sure to check out the store for NP merch and merch from all the other stores. And let's go ahead and move on to our final segment, which would be a strange but true.
Strange but true.
And for this final article of the afternoon, we are going to take a little page out of the Salt and Pepper playbook and talk about sex. And also, like that song that was released in 1991, we will be talking about ancient history. Our article comes from Salon.com by Matthew Rosza, published on January 29th, 2023. And due to a little bit of content on this site, the link actually will not be down below. There is some imagery in there that YouTube might find a little bit exceptional. So if you go over to the Facebook fanbook page, you will see the link for it in there. And what we're going to be talking about is how sex was viewed by the ancient Egyptians, particularly some gods that, created or committed some autofellatio, as it were. And I guess the first question that I'm going to pose to the panel is, while reading this segment, this article, how does the morality of sex in history kind of compare to some of the morals that we see today? Aaron?
It's terrible. Religion likes to control sex for whatever reason. I'm not an expert. I haven't studied any of that. And this article certainly reinforced that the ancient Egyptians were just as conservative and controlling around sex as their contemporary neighbors in Israel at the time. And we see that in religions today, and it's, sex is a wonderful thing. It's fun, it's play, and it's a shame that religions make people feel shame and guilt about something that our bodies naturally do.
Yeah, and I've done a little bit of study on Egypt. It was like a class project back in third grade. We did a whole presentation. It was really interesting, and yeah, their ideas on nudity were also very different from what we have today. And a lot of that ideology of nudity and sex also arose in some of Victorian England. And so Rich, how do you feel about screwing over the rest of the world through Victorian England?
Don't blame the Victorians. Blame what people wrote about the Victorians and soon after Victorians. Now, the Victorians were a horny lot, actually. If you read, there are passages and letters written by Queen Victoria herself where she, let's just say, gleefully comments upon the manhood of her husband, Albert, because he was famously hung like a donkey. So that's why there's a ring named after him. It's how he used to control the beast. But they were, and there was all sorts of things you can find from the Victorian era that are extremely, let's just say, secular sexuality could do a whole episode on the Victorians and what they used to get up to, as opposed to what people used to write about and how they used to write. So don't blame the Victorians, blame the prudes who came after them. But it's an example of how often sex changes through history, and sex is written differently to what's actually going on. And one refreshing thing about the Egyptians is they just, for lack of a better phrase, put it all out there. It's like, this is what sex is, and this is what matters, and seem to have this very strong link with creation. The self-fellatioing God was the God who created the world, supposedly, and that's what creation was, which actually is a bit better than he said abracadabra and it happened because he was bored. So yeah, this is, actually, at least there's some kind of science to it. We know if that thing goes there, then creation happens. So maybe if that thing goes there, then creation happens. It's bad science, but at least it's better. And it's it's a great example of how sex changes over time. Those and the real Victorians, and any era you want to point out. The Greeks one, I'll get into those again. The Greeks were just sex crazy. They do anything to anything so long as certain rules were adhered to, involving giving and taking. Imaginations of a drive, I hope. And throughout history, there is no one way to have sex. Now, the religious thing is something that is very interesting. It seems to me to be tied up with religion because, of course, sex is about creating life, and it's about pleasure, and it's about all those things that if you can control them, you can control anything. If you can take that central aspect together, you can hold it. But I am with Stephen Fry on current views about sex. He said in, I think it was the Intelligence Squared debate, he said the Catholic Church, I'll use the Catholic Church as an example, but they're all like this. The Catholic Church, that sex is a bit like food. If you obsess about it, you probably have some kind of mental illness. And the Catholic Church obsess about sex all the time. They are basically the obese, the sexually obese, the Catholics. And it's, but go and look at, there's some fantastic books about the history of sex. I won't mention them here for all sorts of reasons, but seek them out. Just go in your Google and put history of sex, and there's about 10 books, and all of them are awesome. The first 10, I guarantee you, are all awesome. And they'll blow your mind as to what people used to get up to in the Victorian eras, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, you name it. The Romans, it's just, wow. Have you seen Caligula? It's kind of accurate. But yeah.
And Aaron talked a little bit on the language of excluding homosexuality by the ancient Egyptians, and how that makes them possibly less tolerant. And does the ability to label something and give it recognition, is that what we have today that they don't have back then, and make it more palatable? Or could it potentially be causing some of the rift that we're just recognizing this now? What do you think, Scott?
Well, I think that we certainly see, people like having sex, people like doing the dirty deed, right? And so we shouldn't be surprised that this kind of thing pops up. We shouldn't be surprised that, pun intended, we shouldn't be surprised that the attitudes towards sex go up and down and in and out. Boy, it's a pun fest today, right? Because we've seen this kind of thing. We've already, Rich just gave us a bunch of examples. We got the Kama Sutra, right? It's one of the most famous sex books ever. I mean, that was right around the time when they were writing down in the Bible, talking about genitals like donkeys and emissions like horses and stuff like that. And so I think what we're seeing here is just normal human behavior. And so I think the fact that these societies are tying this sexual behavior and this sexual activity to their gods is just another point in favor of showing how gods are made in man's image and not the other way around. And so we give things that we're interested in, we might be interested in autofellatio, and so we'll have a god do that. We talked about how origin of the universe stories talk about ejaculation into the Nile and stuff like that. And that's stuff that people do. That's how people make other people, that kind of thing. And so it makes sense that that would see that. And so I think we shouldn't be surprised at any of this from this story. I mean, it totally fits in with the crashing waves up and down, the repetitive nature of human behavior and human history. We should expect to see this. And you know what? It's probably going to happen again too. They're probably going to find, some future civilization might find some of our, images of sexuality and say, oh boy, we're what's happened? They were just either so prudish or so way out there, depending on what they're from. And so it's just all part of being a person.
Yeah, I don't think that religion in general has a problem with sex, because the Bible says, go forth and multiply. Scott, you mentioned the Karma Sutra, which is coming from very Hindu ideas. And I was lucky enough to be able to travel around a little bit, and like the Japanese, when they go about their business, they're very kind of like sexually repressed people societally. But when the sun goes down, the hair comes down. Oh man, does it get kind of nuts. I mean, if you've ever got a chance to see a fertility festival, it would make some sailors blush. Let's just put it that way. And so religion in general doesn't have a problem with sex. I think religion has a problem with types of sex. And with Christianity, I think they're trying to take, and we do see it, a more reproductive view of sex, that it should only be for reproduction, because when you don't have a lot of humans around, you want to make sure that the survival of the species continues, the survival of the tribe continues. And that's where we see that, oh, no, you shouldn't engage in the types of sex that would be unproductive or unreproductive, as it were, and that you should only do these very, very specific acts. And I think that's where that is coming from. Anybody can go ahead and correct me if I'm wrong, but what do you think about that, Aaron?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that the religion wants to control the type of sex you have. It's almost, in my experience, they kind of want to have their cake and eat it too. I grew up a Christian, and as a member of the Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they had a little pamphlet that they gave to all the youth, and one of the topics of that little pamphlet is sexual purity, chastity. And it was, all the time, frequently drilled into us that no sexual relations before marriage, and that includes masturbation, that includes any kind of sexual activity with a member of the opposite sex, and heaven forbid a member of the same sex. And nobody ever came out and said, yo, you're a bad person if you don't follow these rules. But you internalize that message. That so sex must be bad. There must be some reason why, and you feel guilt and shame when, of course, you're going to masturbate when you're growing up. Everybody does. It's natural. It's normal. You're going to feel guilty when you engage in sexual activity with somebody that you're not married to, and that just feeds on itself. And then when you're finally able to have sex, then you have this fear, this shame, and this guilt around it that's been built up. And that's been my experience.
So this particular article doesn't really come up with any kind of conclusion, but if we were to kind of give a conclusion to the idea of this, with all the imagery that we see in this particular article, which again you can only access from Facebook, with kind of imagery and ideology that they had with the gods having sex and all that, does that make Egypt more or less freaky? Scott, what do you think?
Well, one thing it shows us is that their gods were definitely well endowed and were some badass contortionists. I'll tell you that, because I'm sure any bored teenager with a penis can tell you that that's a difficult position, or so I'm told.
Yeah.
To maintain. It's
easier
just
for some than others.
Right. And so there's definitely a freak factor going on there. I will also throw in that this god that was from this picture, Geb, the earth god, has a sister / consort by the name of Nut. Take from that what you will.
Rich, what do you think?
The Egyptians married their sisters all the time. I think Cleopatra, who wasn't even really Egyptian, she was Greek, but she still married her brother at one point until she met the Romans, the powerful one who got killed, and the other one who again had a massive, apparently. So it seems to be a running theme in the history of sex. Men who are very well endowed. Maybe I'll appear in history, but anyway, it is an interesting fact that often how an attitude to sex is shaped around a culture and shaped around a culture's understanding of hierarchy, and so are their gods. There's this link there. So in Egyptians, you've got these very sexualized gods, these ideas of creation, of how sex leads to things coming into existence, and so the gods obviously partook in it. In the Greeks, they have a very much a structure of a kind of a great chain of being where you have the gods at the top of pure reason, followed by men, followed by women and young boys. And so that's the direction that sex can happen. So the gods could have sex with whoever they wanted. Men can have sex with women and young men, and young men can only really have sex with young men. But that's the Greeks, and that's how they saw the structure of the world, and that's so their gods reflect their society, and their society reflects their gods. And so you get to Christianity, where you have God who's basically a boring prude who doesn't want even people to eat an apple, and so people can't even bear fruit unless it's for children. And it is
tribe.
You'll find the Kama Sutra. Karma is one of the 4 great desires of Hinduism. It's the desire that is for worldly material stuff, and it is an important desire, but they wrote down this is how you should do it properly, because it's not the most important desire. That, of course, is karma as opposed to karma. Very easy to get it mixed up. Karma as in karma, kama as in kama, and of course your path as well is very important. So again, their society saw things as this is the path, this is the way you should do things, this is how you should handle things. Sex will always be a reflection. How we understand sex will always be a reflection of how our society understands sex, and our gods will always be an understanding of that as well. So I'd love to see the secular sexuality god. I'm picturing it now.
So basically, what you're trying to say is that you want to be on secular sexuality. Well, we'll call up Christy and get you on there. Aaron,
only if I can be God.
See, that's not helping the atheist position. Is like you just want to be gods. Anyways, that's a separate aside. Aaron, what do you think about the freaky nature of Egyptians?
I think everybody's freaky. I think we just don't talk about it. I think if we were more open about talking about sex, I think you'd find there's a lot of freaky people out there that like a lot of freaky things and want to do more freaky things, but they feel like it's their God doesn't want them to do it. Or it's really interesting. The language around sex involves dirty talk or being naughty. It's really interesting that we use those words around sex when sex is neither of those things.
I mean, one could make the argument of, if sex isn't dirty, then you're not doing it right. But that's neither here or there. So we are pretty much at the end of the show. And I want to thank each and every last one of you for joining us. And I want to thank our audience members for sitting through all these discussions with us. And I want to say that if you want to join our fan social media outlets, you can. You can find most of the nonprofit hosts on the Atheist Community of Discord by going to tiny.cc/ACD Discord, and on Facebook at tiny.cc/FBNP, as the slide just showed right there. If you would like to support the show, you can do so by becoming a patron at tiny.cc/PatreonNP. And if you find yourself already shopping at Amazon, at least for the moment, you can support the Atheist Community of Austin by shopping at smile.amazon.com and selecting the Atheist Community of Austin as the beneficiary. Please use that link to help out, as we do really appreciate it. We also very, very much value your feedback. Tell us what you like and what you didn't like in the comments section. I know I will be there for at least the first 7 days that this video comes out. Or you can email us at nonprofit@atheist-community.org. Also, you can visit the Atheist Community of Austin's official website at atheist-community.org on the latest of what's happening, and feel free to contact the ACA directly at tv@atheist-community.org. So we have just a few minutes left to us, but I do want to give some final thoughts on the episode in general. Scott, I'm going to have you start us off.
Well, this was my my first time appearing with Rich and Aaron. Rich, I thought you masterfully drove that last segment to give you an opportunity to brag about your personal prowess. So I thought thumbs up for that. Aaron, I'm going to start the ball rolling here. I like you. Thank you. So it was fun to meet you and fun talking to you. Jason, of course, you're the old dog on the show here. It was always fun working with you, and I was happy to have an opportunity to do that today.
And Rich, really quick.
Yeah, what an interesting show. We seem to have had a running theme of the overreach of religion into our lives, didn't we? With it being politics, or claiming like grooming's happening, or trying to mess about with schools, or God's having self-fellatio. It's always some kind of religious overreach affecting society. It's really good to have not been on with Aaron or Scott either. Nice to meet you both. No, last segment was quite exciting. It's not really true though, sadly. Sorry.
And Aaron, thank you for joining us as well. And do you feel like you would want to come back?
Oh, I'd love to come back. Yeah, this was a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun talking to people smarter than me, and giving me avenues to go and learn more about.
Excellent. And, on behalf of all the panelists here, I do want to thank each and every last one of you for watching and listening, and we will go ahead and see you next time.
Have you ever wanted to be a host on an ACA show, or be the one calling the shots behind the scenes? Are you in Austin, Texas, or at least Austin adjacent? Well, on Saturday, February 25th, make your way down to the Free Thought Library, because we'll be holding open auditions for show hosts and orientations for prospective crew members. For those wanting to be hosts, you'll be able to sit in the studio where our shows are broadcast, and we'll put you through your paces to see if you can be one of the new personalities of the ACA. For future crew members, you'll get hands-on experience using the equipment used for broadcast, and will help us record the host auditions. If you've ever dreamed of being part of the ACA productions, then this is your chance to show us what you've got. This event is free. For more information and registration, visit tiny.cc/ACA auditions.